Glad Force Flex Max Strength now has bags with a 2 times stronger top for over-the-top strength. Like the kind of over-the-top strength you need when, breaks your bowl of buffalo chicken dip. Glad Force Flex Max Strength. Strong enough for all of life's garbage. 2 times stronger top versus 13-gallon Force Flex bags.
Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast, and my name is Jack Collins. I'll be your host today. Joining me across the water, live from San Diego, it is Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yes, I'm very good, mate. Blimey, another episode. These come thick and fast, don't they, mate? I mean, just think you just got over the last one, and then we're sat here again recording a new one. Hundreds of times we've sat here, mate. But always happy to be here, and I'm glad everybody's still tuning in to listen to us Muppets talk about football.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing that makes me happier week by week than that sad fact. But yes, thank you as ever so much for tuning in. How's the transfer window treating you, Dean? You busy?
Yeah, I'm not really enjoying it. I'm joking. It's actually a good window because it's been busier than I thought. I mean, I don't enjoy it because I'm busy, but that's the idea of it, isn't it? When you go to work, you're supposed to be busy. And seeing as it's only open for 4 months of a year, I shouldn't really complain too much.
No, not hugely.
No. But yeah, there's been loads of stuff that I didn't think would actually happen that's starting to look like it would happen. Like Man City have been lively, which makes other teams a bit concerned. We get loads of messages on Patreon asking about, like, are Chelsea signing a forward? Are Arsenal signing a forward? And suddenly I'm always like, well, at the moment they're saying no. Chelsea are saying they're not, but don't totally believe that, because if Nkunku looks to get out there, then suddenly things click into gear and they do end up signing a forward. And obviously that started to happen at the beginning of the week. Suddenly today you've got the Zubimendi rumour about him going to Arsenal in the summer, which if it comes
Arsenal
to
sorting out their dire need for a striker by signing a deep-lying midfielder did make me laugh this morning, although I am a huge Zubimendi fan, and I love what he puts together. They're
just trying to become Real Sociedad at this point with Marino and Odegaard and him.
Well, they did play 3 games together in the summer of 2020, I believe, for Real Sociedad. So it's good that Arsenal were looking to recreate that midfield.
Yeah, that was Arteta's inspiration in a time when some fans are starting to jump on his back and
I
say,
suppose it makes sense. He is from there.
Yeah, he's like, this is what I know. This is where we're going back to. But obviously that would be a good sign-in. And then you got Tottenham and Man United, who are going to get busy at some point in the coming weeks. Liverpool fans, I think, are a little bit edgy at the moment. They're like, why are we not in for Kvaratskhelia? Why are we not in for Zubimendi? Like, why are we not signing a centre-back? Liverpool continue to say they're not going to do anything. So I'll take that with a pinch of salt for now. But yeah, it's definitely been lively, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an exciting time for everybody.
And loads
involved.
of transfer stuff on Patreon this month too, worth pointing out. We are doing Transfers from Paradise newsletter, which is going out multiple times a week to keep everybody in the loop with stuff that I'm hearing and taking questions too. So that's fun. I'm enjoying that. And I haven't really done specific transfer pods yet, but I will do some of those before the end of the month. So probably even record one today or tomorrow, to be honest with you, just to get some extra content out there and tell people what to expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do come and join us. Link as ever in the description if you fancy more content from Dean and I. We're going to get stuck into this today, Dean. We're going to take a look at the competitions around Europe and who we think might be on course to lift some trophies. Obviously, we've seen a few trophies lifted over the last couple of weeks. We saw AC Milan win the Supercopa Italia, win their first 2 games under Sergio Conceição, which was pretty cool as a start. And then at the weekend, saw Barcelona lift the Supercopa de España against Real Madrid, which was a very, very interesting game. And I think that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start with the sort of things we love, discussing a little bit more around that game, because you didn't get a chance to do that on the Postbox on Patreon. I did on the Postbox Extra, so there is more from me on this. But there was a sense, I think, about this game that this was a pretty statement victory from Barcelona. And I think what we'll get out of this, and we'll glean it, is it will take us into the first of these competitions we're going to talk about, which is the Champions League, and how teams are shaping up to actually go and win Europe's biggest club competition trophy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was weird actually not analysing this Classico on the Patreon. So I'm glad that we are talking about it. It was obviously a mad game. I'm not as concerned for Real Madrid as 90% of the population seem to be.
Interesting. Why?
Because I feel like, obviously, it's embarrassing and it's concerning when you're taken apart by Barcelona like that. And I'm not saying like I don't see faults in that game that I would be concerned about. But if Real Madrid's big flaw this season is just losing to big teams, then that doesn't stop them from winning La Liga. They've got different problems to what Barcelona have got. And if you think back to when they were beaten 4-0 by Barcelona, it was kind of like, that's it from everyone. And even I, like, you know, a Madrid optimist, was like, yeah, there's a long way back from that. And I did the video on Instagram of Dylan throwing his Mbappe shirt in the bin, which is doing great numbers again, by the way. Shame I don't make money off of Instagram, because I think I'd probably earned a few quid off that one. But when you consider the actual games that Madrid have lost since then, they lost to AC Milan in the next game. They've lost to Liverpool. They lost to Athletic Club. And then this one. So they're only losing to really good teams. I mean, Milan, okay, you could say 50-50 on that one. But when they turn up, this AC Milan.
Yeah, when they turn up, they turn up.
They turn up. So, and then you think, okay, so what have they got coming up? And then I start to look through the fixture list. I'm like, well, they haven't got one of these difficult fixtures for a few weeks now until they get to the Atletico Madrid game, the Madrid derby. And then obviously you're looking, well, when's the next one against Barcelona? And it's right at the back end of the season, four game weeks from the end. So from like a broader outlook here, I'm not too concerned for Real Madrid, because it seems like they can't win the big games and the big moments, but the bigger picture is actually looking okay. And that's quite a hard thing to analyze, actually, because like when you look at this performance and you go through player ratings and you see, like, you know, Lucas Vazquez is getting like 1 out of 10 and Tchouameni's getting a 2 out of 10. You're like, okay, yeah, well, obviously that's fundamentally flawed, and like you can't be doing that against this Barcelona team. But you're also got to consider, well, Bellingham had a quiet game. Vinny wasn't himself. That's not normal. Mbappe was brilliant, which isn't normal, but it's a good sign.
Here's a good sign.
And so I came away from it just being like, oh, this is just a quirk of the season. They just can't beat Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, we got sent this as a question on the Postbox, actually. Someone said the old adage rings true that all teams fear Real Madrid and Real Madrid fear Barcelona, which seems to be the thing this season. Yeah. But I do think it's interesting because, I mean, I think I picked up or gleaned a few things from this game. One is that Real Madrid need to work out how they press, because currently two of their front line don't press. And their attacking midfielder also doesn't press, which means that they have no way of forcing pressure on the ball in the first third, which is a problem because Barcelona just played their way through them. And then there were massive, massive gaps between the forward line, the four in that front line with Bellingham, Rodrigo, Mbappe and Vinicius, and then Valverde behind them basically mopping up and trying to do all the space. And look, Valverde covers the work of two men, but it wasn't enough to miss three players in the early press. And actually what happened was Lucas Vazquez was dragged out of position. And yes, he was very bad, right? Fine. But on Mendy, very, very bad. They're not going to have games like that all the time. But my big takeaway from Real Madrid in this game was surely they can't go on with this defense. Surely they can't spend the rest of the season with Lucas Vazquez at right back.
No.
Surely they can't spend the rest of the season with Tchouaméni filling in at centre back. Now, I think Aurélien Tchouaméni gets a bit of a rough ride. I think he's a wonderful football player that's being forced out of position because he's having to do things for the need of his team. But I don't think David Alaba coming back in sorts out Real Madrid's defensive issues, because that's going to shift Rudiger to his wrong side, which is not where he's at his strongest. And they still don't have any cover at right back. The only person I would trust to play there right now is Valverde, and they need him in the middle if their front line is not going to do any work. So there are fundamental problems with this side that, for me, overshadow this, rather than, I take your point about it just being a result, a single result. That's fine. And I think that, them losing the Clásico is, yes, a big thing, but ultimately they'll look at the league table and think, well, we're still above Barcelona there. They've still got a fair bit, to catch up with us, even if they ended up beating us one more time this season. But I think that my big concern is that teams will look at the way that Barcelona have played against Real Madrid, their ability in transition, their ability to open up space and be clinical when things happen. And look, the big games are where Barcelona have kind of risen to the fore this season in a similar way to Milan, but with a little bit more consistency on it. You kind of look at that and you think, well, if that's the case, then one, do Barcelona have a shot at the Champions League because they're actually able to go and win these games? Two, are Real Madrid going to struggle in the Champions League because it's these big games that they have been struggling with, teams that have the ability to actually pick holes in them and then utilize those counters, utilize that transition and really hurt them in those phases. But then also you kind of come to this point where you're thinking, Real Madrid seasons are judged in the Champions League. This is where the fan base lives or dies, right? This is where the managements live or die. And right now, and maybe this will look really, really stupid in 3 months when they absolutely storm through the knockout stages as usual. But right now, I think there is a sense that Real Madrid do not feel like they have the capacity to compete with sides who know how to hurt them and have the players in those positions who are able to cause them problems. And for me, that's a major problem if you're going into a Champions League knockout round.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that does confuse me about it all, because you do count on Madrid to win those one-off occasions, and I'd normally just expect that they pull their act together in the second half of the season. Vinny stands up to be counted once we get into these Champions League matches, and that they're fine. And obviously, we've seen some signs of it. There was obviously the 5-2 win over Dortmund, which was one of the most sensational games you'll still see all season. But you look back at it now, you're like, well, Dortmund are like flagging massively this season, and like that's perhaps not a very good team. So maybe like that wasn't as good a result as it seemed in that moment. They did have that win over Atalanta, which is a pretty good one.
But that definitely still could have gone either way. Yeah,
it was very finely balanced. They've scored a lot of goals recently, so I think that they're okay in that sense. But again, like you look at that Valencia game when they had a red card and they saw it out very late on. I personally think they actually did just about deserve that result at the time, because despite everything that was against them, they still managed to somehow dominate.
Yeah.
But they left it late and they had to show that old fighting spirit. And that's what we need to see again in this team. I think it's still there, but that right back slot is a huge concern for me. I don't even think Trent Alexander-Arnold fixes it. I've talked about that before. Like, I don't think that that's the answer to their problems in that position, because he doesn't actually solve it in my eyes.
I think they need a new right centre back before they start worrying about whether Trent's good enough or not defensively to actually worry. Like, if you have a right back who's incredibly good going forward, that's all well and good. And you are Real Madrid, you're going to dominate a lot of games. I think that Trent would be absolutely fine at Real Madrid, but he's not going to be fine if the player next to him is not able to carry out his defensive duties. And currently Tchouaméni is really struggling with them. And you just need to see the way that he loses Rafinha for that headed goal, right? To suggest this is someone not that comfortable with playing in this role, especially in a team who are struggling against transitional attacks at the best of times, right? So there is a level of that I think you could bring Trent in, and even if he comes in January, I think that Trent would be a success at Real Madrid. But I don't think he'd be a success in this iteration of Real Madrid until they sign a new centre-back alongside or Militao comes back. But that isn't going to happen this season. So it's kind of like one of those sticky ones where they have a lot to do still. And, there were questions about Carlo Ancelotti right after this. And we got one, from our friend Jordan, who basically was like, I don't buy it. I don't see it. I think he's a fraud, which I think is slightly an overreaction, if I'm being perfectly honest. But the point being with that discussion is there are things about this that you go, well, what did Ancelotti do in this situation? In the summer, and look, I think it comes down to whether you believe he had the say or the final say in who came in and who didn't. Because once the Lenny Yoro saga was over and he went to Manchester United, Ancelotti came out and was like, don't want any more centre-backs. Don't want, and I think that we're done in the market in that area. If he has made that decision, then this has to fall on him, right? If he has made that call, if he is the person who's gone, I don't want any more centre-backs because I think I have enough, then unfortunately, then he's got to take some responsibility. And I said this in the same way that Pep did earlier this week, where he put his hands up and went, I said that we didn't need the rebuild in the summer. I was wrong. And I was like, okay, fine. Reasonable. You put your hands up there and gone, I just miscalled it. And if Ancelotti has made those decisions, he needs to make the same admittance here rather than banging on going, oh no, we're absolutely fine at centre-back. Because right now, Real Madrid clearly are not.
Yeah, he's got to prove he's not becoming a stubborn old man, hasn't he? People will start to look at him, particularly with a certain generation now. You look at Ancelotti and you see a man in his mid-60s, if you're like a 20-year-old Real Madrid fan, and you don't know necessarily all the history and heritage and the moments that he's had across his career. Look, they haven't all been great. Like, I'm not going to totally defend Ancelotti here. But I think generally you trust him, but it does seem a bit of a dumb decision to not go in for a centre-back. I think the other big concern I'd have too is just that his stubbornness is extending to this refusal to kind of give Arda Güler and Endrick the opportunities that they probably would be getting if they were Barcelona players, right? And, one of the things that Barca will be proud of at the moment is the fact that they are flourishing in matches like this with kids like Lamine and Casado and Kubasi, and they're giving these guys the platform to project themselves and to live up to the hype, and they're doing it. Now, obviously, it's a slight risk because you can kill them, you can kill their confidence, you can do damage in games like that by playing.
There's also with Barcelona, and I do appreciate this, a slight bit of need, right? It's necessity that has driven this. Now they've made their mark and therefore have been given the opportunities again. But it wasn't like, oh, we're going to start these players because we decided to. It's because they have had the need and the necessity financially and in terms of the players that are around that they have to play them.
Yeah, exactly. And so that depth that Madrid need, and maybe they do still miss like Toni Kroos, who was at the other end of it, but
they definitely do.
Yeah, but there was not seemingly any strategy to overcome that when they must have known it was coming, which is confusing. So I'm always going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they usually end up proving to be right when everybody else is wrong. But this is a really, really intriguing moment because at the moment I'd probably back them to win La Liga, yet not win the Champions League. And normally I'd be doing the opposite in this situation.
Okay, so if we're not backing Real Madrid to win the Champions League, then let's talk about it, because who are currently your favourites to go and lift that old trophy? And I know this is kind of, we're doing this before a bracket, we're doing it before even the league stage is opened. Like, there is a lot of football to be played here. But I think this is more an exercise in kind of assessing where everyone's seasons have been as much as it is kind of trying to predict it. It's the teams who have performed enough in those kind of games that we're looking at it and thinking, yeah, right now it's very difficult to see, Real Madrid stepping into that. As you say, it's the big games that they've fallen down in so far this season. And that's fine to a degree, but it's not a sustainable thing if you want to go and win the Champions League. Whereas with Barcelona, for example, the fact that they have stepped it up in those big games, I don't think Barcelona can go and win La Liga. I don't think they have good consistency, and I think they've really struggled in games where they've actually been camped on the edge of the opposition's box to find that kind of breakthrough and have dropped points in those kind of games, whereas Real Madrid haven't. But the way that you see them play and step up their game against the best teams that we've seen them come up against this season suggests to me that they can go on and win the Champions League, because on their day, I think they're as good as anybody in the world.
Yeah, they definitely are. And they're second currently in the standings for the Champions League. And Liverpool are top because they have been the only completely consistent team across Europe so far this season. You know, whether they can maintain that for an entire season under Arne Slot is anyone's guess, because we haven't seen him do it at this level and with a squad of this type. But the fact that Liverpool have played 6-1-6 so far in the Champions League means they obviously have to be considered favourites. They've only conceded one goal. Yeah. So they are the team to beat. Could Barcelona beat them? Absolutely. Absolutely. If you were to give me now a one-off game between Barcelona and Liverpool, I think I'd back Barcelona, mate.
I don't know if I would stretch that far, but I think it would be pretty even. Like, I don't know.
I'm not saying it'd be like 3 or 4-0, but I think when you see the way that Liverpool have been undone at times this season, I feel like Barcelona have the exact players that could make the most of those vulnerabilities and catch them out in their weak spots for sure. And particularly in transitions, I think Barcelona would have the potentials to go and get them. So I think my ranking would certainly be Liverpool 1, Barcelona 2, as it sits right now in the table. Because when you start getting deeper, there aren't that many obvious contenders to go and win this. Like Arsenal, a third in the Champions League. Do I think Arsenal can win the Champions League? I don't know. I don't. Not on what we've been seeing recently. I think that they've reverted to a type of performance that they didn't necessarily need to get back to so fast. I miss the kind of free-flowing football they played. They miss Saka. There's no doubt about that. But I just can't trust them enough at the moment to say that I fancy them to go and win the Champions League.
Yeah, I mean, look, Arsenal will get better. And I think that considering the amount of chances they've created in recent weeks, like their finishing will return to some sort of level of normality at some point, and they will start winning games again. But equally, I do think that you look at the two performances that we've just seen where they're knocked out of the FA Cup by Manchester United in one of them and effectively knocked out of the League Cup by Newcastle United in the other.
But then they drew with Brighton before that as well. So it's 3 games now. 3 concerning games in a row. And that
they will get better. Like, I'm not hugely worried about Arsenal in that regard, I think is probably the way I would phrase it.
I think the attack is though, mate. I think the attack is concerning now that Saka's shown to be such an absence. I mean, we obviously knew that this would be the case, and you take the best player out of any team, you take Mo Salah out of Liverpool, you take Lamine Yamal out of Barcelona.
Yeah, we've seen that, right?
You know, we've seen what happens. So of course this happens, but do you go and fix it? Do you trust Ethan Nwaneri to fix it? It's a big call, right? But in the last 3 games, we've seen like Arsenal haven't been able to do it. A 1-1 draw at Brighton, 2-0 defeat to Newcastle, a 1-1 draw with 10 men Man United. Like, yeah, it's not great. So I certainly, as I say, can't back them to go and win the Champions League. And then Bayer Leverkusen, great team, not going to win the Champions League. Aston Villa,
I don't know. You know what? I tell you what, Leverkusen have really, really sprung to life in the last couple of weeks.
You think they could win the Champions League?
Honestly, I wouldn't put it past them. I think that what we've seen from Leverkusen in recent weeks, especially, in this game against Borussia Dortmund, the first game out of the gate in the second half of the Bundesliga, they score after about 15 seconds with Nathan Teller, who's replaced Florian Wirtz, who Alonso drops because he comes late to the meeting.
It was a great goal.
You know what? That is so bold to drop the crown prince, Florian Wirtz, of this Leverkusen team in a game away at Dortmund. You haven't lost at home in the league all season, and you go, no, you're 5 minutes late, you're dropped.
Yeah, but if you listen to his reasoning around it, if you listen to the actual reasoning around it and all that, he's been sat in traffic for a long time. He wasn't there. He missed out on the detailed planning of the actual game.
Yeah.
Like,
it's still bold, though.
It's still bold, but
if Mo Salah turned up late to an Arne Slot meeting, I think Liverpool would still play him.
Maybe. But
we've just talked about big players, the best player in the team coming out of a team and them not performing, and they go to Dortmund, who haven't lost at home all season. I repeat, right? And they just go like, nah, you're all right. No, we'll play without you. Nathan Teller scores after what, 15 seconds? Like
Yeah.
that is depth, but it's also Xabi Alonso being like, this is a team as opposed to everything else. And the way that they've played in recent weeks, I know that they lost to Liverpool very comfortably at Anfield earlier in the campaign.
Absolutely battered them.
But that was a Leverkusen wobbling. That was a Leverkusen wobbling. And since about November, they've had a really, really good streak of performances. They've been very, very impressive. So, like, well, that's it. And you're kind of looking at that, and then you kind of drop down the table. I think you're right in terms of, I'm not 100% sure that Arsenal can win this competition. I think Leverkusen I would have higher in the rankings currently than where Arsenal are. Villa, I don't think are going to win the Champions League this season, although their performances in the competition have been impressive. I think Inter have a shot because this team, again, doesn't concede many goals and have feelingly found their kind of scoring touch in recent weeks.
And to be fair, Leverkusen did actually beat them, and I know it was a last-minute goal, but I felt like they deserved that win as well. So I know I've just kind of knocked down Leverkusen, but that was a big win for them actually over Inter.
And then in 11th, you currently have Atletico Madrid, who are also currently on a 12, 13 game unbeaten streak, best in their history. So I think it would be wild to rule out Atleti considering some of the performances they've put in so far this season. But that's where I'd have it. Like there's no one below that. I'm thinking, even this Atalanta side who have been great. I'm not completely convinced can compete on both fronts. And they play tonight, obviously, against Juventus, and we're going to have a better time. By the time you're listening to this, you'll know how that one played out. But, if they're still in the title race, I wonder if they just put their cards on the table and go, we've never won a Scudetto. Like, it is time for us to go and actually absolutely throw everything into this competition. But, aside from that, and this is it, you say Real Madrid there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to consider them. I'm not going to rule them out. That's just what I mean.
I can't see it right now. In the same way that I would say that, I would put Real Madrid currently in the same category as our Arsenal. In terms of their performance this season, I know that there are different historical levels to this, right? But right now, I'm like, Arsenal need to fix these attacking problems before I can consider them a serious contender for this. Real Madrid need to fix these defensive problems. If they have not signed a player by the end of January, I just don't see a world where Real Madrid win the Champions League. Yeah,
I get it. But I think people have said that before and been proven wrong.
Yeah, that is true.
Definitely happened. But you've got to remember that what it takes to win the Champions League is not just that combination of talent on the pitch, but it's all about preparation and mindset and a bit of luck. And with Madrid, they've still always got that. They've got the quality players. They might not have the balance of quality players. Like that might be where they fall short. But they got reasonable depth. Have they got an elite manager? Of course they have. Like you can try to be harsh on him right now, but Ancelotti is one of the best managers you could possibly have. And mental strength, resilience is right up there. So the big fall down will probably be, well, that balance, but also, I guess, if you were to question Ancelotti, like, has he got the tactical nous to kind of get that balance to be balanced out so that they can actually go and exploit other teams' problems? But obviously, they've got experience and things like that. And then the only other team to discuss, just quickly, mate, is obviously Man City, who are going about a mid-season overhaul. They're trying to fix as many things as they possibly can right now. They can't be as bad as they've been in the first half of the season. No. They're going to get some injured players back. Not Rodri, so that's still going to be key. They're not getting Zubimendi, who they have been interested in, but they're not getting him. We'll have to wait to see which midfielder they end up signing, because I think that is going to be crucial to what happens here. Like, focusing on centre-backs is fine. Getting Omar Marmoush in will be great. But where's that centre mid? I mean, I was told they even want 2 centre mids before the deadline. So
until Manchester City sign a central midfielder, like I kind of refuse to consider them in the conversation.
But if they do it, mate, like,
if they do it, then that changes things, right? Like that does change things. But
it does change things, and they're 22nd in the Champions League right now, which is quite a funny thing to say because we've never had to talk about it like this before. But their next game, obviously, in the Champions League is against PSG, and both of those teams are on a knife edge here in this competition. So that'll be a fascinating one, in a week or so.
Well, also, this is the league stage, right? So they're not going to have any new players available for that, whether they sign them or not.
Yeah.
So that's going to be intriguing to see how they set up, even if, they end up with a couple of new players for the Ipswich game that they have at the weekend. The PSG one next week, you're like, ooh, don't know where that's going. That could be interesting. Back to what we had. So,
I mean,
maybe its players get a rest. Maybe that's the important thing that happens. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be gleaned in what happens in the rest of this window, of course. Right, so after the break, we're going to move this on to some leagues. So stick with us. Welcome back to Ranks FC, where it's time to talk about where we're standing on some of these leagues and who might end up lifting these trophies. We're going to start with the Premier League, Dean, not because I think it's the most interesting. In fact, it's because I think this one is the one we can get through the quickest. But as we're recording this, Liverpool are about an hour away from playing Nottingham Forest at the City Ground, which feels like everyone else's last hope to try and drag Liverpool back into the chasing pack, back into the peloton. And if this doesn't go the way of the rest of the clubs, even if it does, to be perfectly honest with you, I still can only see one winner in the Premier League.
Well, you've called it in the bag, so you have to believe that. I wish we were recording it after that game, because if Nottingham Forest can pull off a result there, it changes everything for me. It changes everything, and I start to wonder if Liverpool do slow down in the second half of the season, if Arne Slot can recapture the momentum that he had in the first half, if Mo Salah can continue in the form that he was on. Obviously, there's not much evidence of a Liverpool wobble at the moment, like drawing with Man United and then losing to Tottenham potentially is a wobble, but like until we see them in Premier League action, we don't truly know what their true self is right now. So really difficult to properly analyse this as I sit here. I'm not as convinced as you are that Liverpool romp home to this title. Like, I'm really not. But my biggest question continues to be, who has got the balls to go and put up the fight? Like, who actually pushes them and takes this title away from them? I just can't see that at the moment. And even as I sit here and I'm looking at a table which, as of Tuesday before that game, reads Arsenal second in the league, Forest third, Chelsea fourth, Newcastle fifth, Man City sixth. Honestly, my eyes still keep going to Man City and being like, well, how many points behind are they? Because they're the ones that could potentially catch them. And because
flying from Newcastle United, mate.
Yeah, like all the respect in the world, like Nottingham Forest, their chances of pulling off a Leicester City are slim because Liverpool are probably too good. Like Leicester didn't have a Liverpool type challenge that season. And that's why they were able to get over the line. It was a great season for that. And, as a neutral, you'd love to see Nottingham Forest be able to genuinely put together a title charge.
100%.
But it's obviously very, very difficult to imagine. But that's why I want them to go and beat Liverpool. Chelsea, nope. I wanted to believe that they should be, because I don't believe that you should be able to spend over £1 billion and change managers and do all these different things and not be considered title candidates. But since the day that Fulham taught them a lesson, it's been out the window. Newcastle, obviously top four will be great for them. They're not going to be in the title race. And then it's Man City. And probably not, because as I sit here right now, they're 12 points behind Liverpool, who have a game in hand on them. Yeah. So it seems impossible. But if Liverpool wobble and Haaland recaptures his form that he had in the first few games of the season, then you never totally know. But it would be stupid to sit here and have a debate over anybody else actually catching Liverpool until they properly start to wobble.
Yeah, I mean, look, Arsenal picked up the same amount of points as Liverpool in the last 5 games, right? So, and Forest have picked up, 4 more in that time? So have Newcastle United. Forest currently 6 points back with a game in hand, and those two obviously meet tonight. So we will see. They, I suppose, don't have the rigors of European football. It's something we talked about with Antonio Conte's Napoli, and it's probably something that we shouldn't ignore in this capacity, that they will have more rest and they won't have to rotate quite as much going into the end of this season. And look, they've been absolutely brilliant and it's been joyful. But you also look at the goal differences, right? And I think that's probably a good indication of where everyone's been. Arsenal was 7 back on Liverpool, having played a game more. Forest are currently 18 goals back on goal difference. So even if they caught them up on the points total, they'd have to surpass them in order to do it. I think it's just going to be very difficult for anyone to catch Liverpool. And I've been saying this for a while now, so I'm not going to change my tune. If it's anyone, I still think it's Arsenal. If they're the ones that catch them. But as you said in the last segment, there needs to be some serious thoughts about how Arsenal go about their business. One, in this transfer window, but two, also in terms of the way that they're playing stylistically right now. I think that's all very, very important. And so we'll kind of see how that plays out. But, I'll start with the Premier League because I kind of thought this one's kind of done and dusted. Yeah. And those questions, I don't think even open up until a few more things fall the way of everybody else. Maybe that starts tonight at the City Ground. Maybe it doesn't. And Liverpool pull further clear. And we'll see what that looks like in a couple of hours' time. Let's come on to the Bundesliga, because the Bundesliga looked kind of sewn up for a little while. It looked like Bayern were going to run away with it again, reclaim their standing at the top of this division. Things have got a lot tighter in recent weeks. And, the kind of way that this table looks right now with Leverkusen 4 points behind Bayern, it does look like we might well have a title race on our hands again here, especially because these two meet. And bear in mind that Leverkusen have not lost to Bayern in Xabi Alonso's tenure there, which is an interesting one. But they meet on February the 15th, which is early enough to throw this completely into disarray again if Leverkusen keep winning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad that Leverkusen have been able to turn it up a gear here, and that you're getting players like Patrick Schick step it up and
He's
show
been brilliant in the absence of Boniface. Absolutely sensational. Brilliant. Shouts out to him.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is a striker that really is in a great vein of form at the moment. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Leverkusen are playing today. So again, take everything we say, remembering that we have not seen the results from Tuesday and Wednesday as we record this. But there's a lot of football being played this midweek. But Patrick Schick is, he makes you. He's just so convincing at the moment. His goal scoring record is great, but it's just the way he fits into that team as well. And that's something that's been, for me, really impressive about watching this Leverkusen team, who obviously have been, as I've mentioned before, just in a streak of just win. Doesn't mean what you put in front of them, they are just pulling up trees. So do Bayern wobble? That's going to be the big question. And if so, how bad is it going to be? Because we've seen them lose one game here and there, but that never extends into another defeat. We haven't seen them go back-to-back defeats so far this season. And that's what the chasing pack need to see to truly believe that they are going to be catchable this season. So that's kind of what we're going to be waiting for here. Obviously, reasonably tight game at the weekend, and it relied on a Harry Kane penalty.
Yeah, they weren't all that convincing against that back. I didn't think. And then look, you only have to go back a couple of weeks and that loss to Mainz. And look, Mainz have been brilliant, right? And they deserve so much credit for the way that they're playing, the way that they set up. Bo Henriksen doing an absolutely sublime job with Mainz at the moment. But equally, I think that was a bit of a blueprint on how you can beat Bayern, right? It felt like maybe one of the first games this year in the Bundesliga where Bayern were kind of outclassed a little bit on a coaching front. And this was one of the questions, right, over Kompany coming in. It was going to be, is he going to be able to outclass coaches who have more experience, probably a little bit cannier in terms of what they're doing? Most of the time, he's answered those questions. It helps when you have probably the best squad of players in the division. So there is that to consider. But I think I've been kind of generally quite impressed with the way that Bayern have gone about their business. And up to that Leverkusen game in mid-February, they have a relatively soft schedule. Although, to be fair, they are playing Holstein Kiel in a couple of weeks, who are currently 3-0 up at half-time against Dortmund, which is just unthinkable considering where we've been. But I think, you look at what their run-in looks like for now, and you're thinking, okay, until we get to that Leverkusen game, there aren't loads of chances that you would imagine Bayern are going to be dropping points in. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one goes. But I think you're right in that it probably needs a Bayern slip up and Leverkusen to continue this absolutely sensational vein of form, which, let's be fair, we've seen before under Xabi Alonso. So it wouldn't be totally surprising if Leverkusen carried on at this clip. But I do think it's going to take Bayern slipping up for that door to open again.
And the problem is not just that Bayern have got someone like Harry Kane, who is so trustworthy in front of goal. Like, they don't really give up chances at the moment. So Gladbach, you can say it was tight, but then you think, well, Muller missed an absolute sitter. Gladbach didn't actually have a shot on target. You go back to their game before that against Leipzig when Bayern beat them 5-1. Leipzig had one shot on target. So over the last two Bundesliga games, Bayern have only given up one shot that's actually gone on target. Like, that's pretty impressive in itself. And so they're going to be tough to beat, even if you can kind of keep them at bay up top. Obviously, it's not that long ago that they lost to Mainz. So I'm not going to say that they're not beatable. What I do believe is that they are difficult to beat again and again and again. And that's what has to happen. Otherwise, Harry Kane is finally getting his hands on a proper piece of silverware.
Finally. But also it's good to see Vance and company finally teaching a team how to be good defensively. That's what I've gleaned the most.
Yeah.
From
I think he's spent his whole career defending.
Yeah, considering it. Right, should we come on to La Liga, where things are quite interesting. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Barcelona and Real Madrid already on this podcast, but it's Atleti that lead the way by a point from Real Madrid at the exact halfway point of this season. Atleti on 44, Real Madrid on 43, and Barcelona 5 points back on Real Madrid right now and 6 back on Atleti on 38 after a pretty dreadful run of form to close the first half of the season. 1 win in 5, 3 losses and a draw. Not comfortable by anybody's standards. But I mean, the question, I suppose, Dean, and I know that Sam and Doogie and I talked about this last week on The Truth. How much faith do you have in this Atleti side?
I mean, more than I did 2 months ago when you started getting excited about it. So I'm definitely being won over. I mean, obviously that comes with the results, because I'm just trying to look when they last lost. It was that Betis game, wasn't it? So we're going back a long time now. So like Leverkusen, we're looking here at a long win streak. There are a lot of like narrow wins recently. Like before, you were getting them seeing off teams quite convincingly. But I think it's almost like a better sign. I know it sounds stupid, but when you're like just creeping over the line and getting the wins there, that it kind of matters. So like a 1-0 over Osasuna at the weekend, Copa del Rey, where they done me 1-0, a win over Marbella when I had them to go on a goal glut on our Patreon game. But they got that tight 2-1 win over Barcelona as well. And like, you look at the Osasuna game, like they have very many different ways to go in terms of the way they try to open up chances, which is what I like about Atleti.
This was a bit like that Gladbach game, though, in that it was tight, but it wasn't really. Yeah,
that's totally fair. But it felt like it was going to happen. And, you know, Rodrigo de Paul's like trying to look for these like clever passes. You're like, and eventually it is going to break. Like this will break. And eventually, obviously, they find the breakthrough and Alvarez manages to steer it in. And it's like huge relief. Like you can see the relief in all the players that they've got that breakthrough, because they are now coming up against a wall a lot of the time. Like teams just don't want to break, and they're just trying to sit and keep them. If it's a low block, then so be it, but don't let them break us down. But yeah, I feel like Rodrigo de Paul is becoming a more and more important player in this, in terms of like he's got to look for that pass, even if it is that he's playing a player diagonal down to a fullback who's marauding on, and that ball ends up coming back into somebody else to go and finish. There's just got to be a bit of smartness about it. And I think that they've got that, which is a little bit worrying for Barcelona and Real Madrid in terms of like them falling away. I don't really see them falling away at the moment. Barcelona, obviously, like a long way back, 6 points at this stage is pretty significant. Not uncatchable, obviously. But
no, we both of them to play.
Are serious here. I still think Real Madrid will win the league, but at the moment, I will hold my hands up. I don't have much evidence just to tell you why they're better than Atletico Madrid in the Liga.
Well, there isn't any evidence. They're a point behind them. That's the actual.
But
difference.
I mean, on form, on personnel, on matchups, like
It's on
Atleti
balance.
win.
You know, we talked about balance a lot. Atleti look really well balanced.
They do look
They look
balanced,
really well
yeah.
put together. They, you know, since that switch to a 4 at the back, they've just looked far more comfortable in their own skin. They've kind of worked it out and worked out how that right side is operating, which is really nice to see. And Giuliano Simeone making a huge difference for them this season. The depth they have is very, very impressive. They've recruited well in the summer. It all feels very, very strong right now.
I think that's interesting, though, because they did spend a lot of money. And when you do that, it's obviously risky. And people are like, what Atletico Madrid doing? Like, why are they spending this much money? What a waste of time. And it's not. And like clearly they've done a good recruitment job here, and they've actually got in the players that are going to make a difference. And you see the trajectory that they're on with Julian Alvarez compared to where Man City are without Julian Alvarez. And like just spotting little moments like that, thinking, I wonder if he's gettable. Because most clubs wouldn't have thought you could get Julian Alvarez out of Man City, a team that were completely dominant in what is the biggest league in the world. And then you get him. And he completely changes what's possible, because as good as Griezmann's been, you need that backup figure. You need somebody else to be consistently weighing in. And that's what we're seeing with Atletico Madrid this season. Obviously, Sorlot's doing it as well up front. But to have 3 guys that you can rely on for goals, well, it's basically exactly what Man City haven't had this season. Like, as soon as you take away that goal dependency, you're struggling.
Yeah, 100%. And look, Sorlot's doing it off the bench at the moment, which is really interesting. And having players that are willing to do that, to come on and make a difference in Correa and Sorlot, I think that could be the thing that tips Atleti over the line for me in La Liga. So, yeah, I think it's very, very interesting. Finally, probably the best title race in Europe is going on in Serie A. Actually, maybe not in Europe. The Zweite Bundesliga might be the best title race in Europe, but the best in Europe's top 5, I think, is Serie A. I mean, you'll notice that we haven't talked about Liga because, as far as I'm concerned, Liga is finished, done, over. And at the top of Serie A, it's a little bit harder to call because Napoli currently do have a 4-point gap on Inter at the top of the table. But they've also played 2 games more, and they've also played a game more than Atalanta, who plays tonight, where they'll be trying to pick those points back up against Juventus, who still haven't lost, but are in 5th in one of the most bizarre seasons of all time, I think, at this point. But it feels like a 3-way race. I don't think Lazio are going to claw their way back into things, Dean. They haven't been consistent enough, although we will talk more about Lazio a little bit later. But this one feels very exciting. Now, Atalanta, pre-Juventus game, have drawn their last 2. Without those drop points, they'd be right still in the thick of this. And I think it's very interesting that they've had a little bit of a wobble at this point in the campaign. But right now, I think the bookies' favourites very much Inter, even though this Napoli team cooking quite nicely and finding ways to get over the line, even if they are about to lose Kvaratskhelia.
Well, that's what I find interesting, mate. I mean, how much impact does that end up having on him to lose?
Well, I'll tell you, we're going to be doing a full episode on how much impact that has on Napoli on The Truth on Friday.
It seems like such a huge transfer, especially for PSG to take him away in this moment, because I'd kind of considered that PSG had not lost their clout, but weren't throwing their weight around to do something like this, and that people wouldn't necessarily be that tempted to make a jump like this in a moment when they were already doing well. So I'm really intrigued by the fact that transfer is even going to be happening. But I think it's very telling in the way that this title race opens up now, and in terms of how you replace that player. It's so significant to be without him and Osimhen all of a sudden. And I mean, if they did win the title without both of those players, then unbelievable. That is just incredible. But I definitely have doubts about this being maintainable. And I'm looking at the teams below, just thinking, how long is it going to be before they catch them?
I have huge doubts about the fact that they're thinking about replacing him with Alejandro Garnacho. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting. I think at this point, you look at Inter as favourites. But I would add this, that Inter were 2-0 up in the Supercopa final against Milan. And look, there are obviously some extenuating circumstances in that Milan playing with a new manager, a lot on the line, and also kind of got that bounce off the back of that. And also there is an element, I think, with Conceição that he's go out and prove yourselves to me, show me why you should be in this team. And Leao coming off the bench and making a huge difference in that game, I don't think is a coincidence. But with all that said, Inter do not throw away 2-0 leads under Inzaghi. It doesn't happen. Hasn't happened. It's been one of the hallmarks that basically when Inter go ahead, they go on and win the game. They've been so stubborn defensively, especially in the Champions League. We talked about them only conceding 1 goal. They have been such a good side at holding leads, at keeping clean sheets. Maybe Jan Sommer isn't quite at the level that he was last season, but they're still a very good defensive unit. That's the only concern for me right now about Inter. The fact that they actually did throw away that game feels like it could be significant.
Yeah, it does feel significant for sure. And I mean, I think there are different ways that I have been trying to consider how this comes out in the wash in terms of who wins the league. So you've got Napoli have obviously been unbelievably consistent to get to this point, and that's great. But then Atalanta have had a certain momentum about them and almost a pizzazz. And I don't know, mate. I'm guessing here, but probably the people's favourite to go and do this. If I was to pick up an Italian team right now to win the league, I'd want to be supporting them.
100%.
Because they're fun. And they obviously have started to build momentum, not just in terms of one-off results, but in terms of actually going and winning trophies in recent history. And that gives you some sort of kudos when it comes to being believable and chasing down this title. So I like that. And it gives me belief that Atalanta can catch Napoli. But then you look at Inter and it's just that experience. The blend
muscle memory, right?
It's muscle memory, and it's the blend of having those experienced players that have been there and done it,
and the depth.
But they've
the depth they have is
depth
absurd.
That they can dig into, and it's talent that they can bring up and just completely trust it. And the players just don't seem that rattled by much. A couple of times you see them almost in disbelief that things haven't gone their way. But it's not a disbelief in the way that Man City have been looking in disbelief. Oh my God, we're broken. How is this happening to us? It's not like that. It's just oh, this is weird. Well, we need to fix this. And then they do. So
yeah,
that's the thing. We'll see how they're able to treat this next spell of games, because this is where they will look to now get them clearly into their sights and catch them. I mean, it means a lot to have those games in hand, and obviously you just assume
only means a lot if they win it.
That's it. I mean, we're assuming they go and win those games. I mean, it's partly because they've only lost 1 game all season. Napoli have lost three already, so there is that. But does that count for a lot? I mean, Juventus haven't lost a game all season, but they're the draw masters and they just draw every week, so it doesn't mean that much. But
I really want
me,
Juve to go through a season where they don't lose a game and still finish outside the Champions League places. I think it would be maybe the funniest thing of all time.
I mean, absolutely incredible that Juve are in that situation where they're are they the only unbeaten team? They must be, yeah. The only unbeaten team in the league, and they're sitting there.
It might be the only unbeaten team left in Europe's top 5 leagues. I think they probably are.
I was going to say that, but I didn't have time to check it in the middle of my sentence. But yeah, Juventus to be 5th when they're unbeaten.
I know PSG haven't lost a game in the league either.
Oh, yeah,
but it's much of a muchness. Yeah.
So generally, mate, I expect Inter Milan to win the league still. But I really, really hope that Atalanta can do it, to be honest with you. I'd love to see that. That's where I would like to see the steer. This isn't against Napoli either. Absolutely.
It would be an amazing story if Conte won the league whilst losing Kvara and Osimhen. That would be an unbelievable story. But I do worry that with Kvara out, they just might lose a little bit of that edge that's seen them over the line in recent games, and we'll see how things pan out. But
it's Conte's obviously just got that tactical nous that does definitely give them a chance, 100%. And the consistency he manages is very smart. But I also find it a little bit boring. And that's why I want Atalanta to win the league.
Yeah, me too. I think every neutral probably wants Atalanta to win the league at this point. And I think that's a fair place to be. Right, so that's the end of part 2. We'll be back after the break, talking a little bit about the Europa League and the Conference League. I, as you can imagine, can't wait. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Ranks FC, where we cross over to the Europa guru himself, Jack Collins, to wrap up the show with his favourite competitions.
The Europa Twins. I very much enjoy it. I'm sad that the Conference League is actually just called the Conference League now rather than the Europa Conference League, because it means that the Twins thing doesn't work quite as well. But we are where we are. Right, let's talk about the Europa League. And I said I'd come back to Lazio, who currently lead the league table on goal difference over Athletic Club. Now, any of you who've listened to our New Year's podcast where we talked about predictions of the new season, I basically called that I think Athletic will win the Europa League because the final's at San Mamés. Now, that is a lot of emotion and it's a lot of narrative. And obviously, these things don't always come to pass, but I think that would be pretty special. And it's also the reason Dean and I were talking the other day about Nico Williams and whether he can make a move in January. I think he will want to try and push that campaign to its end point before he decides he's going to leave his boyhood club. So putting on the table, cards on the table, that I have this thing about Athletic winning it. Since I saw them qualify and the final being at San Mamés, I've had one thing in my mind whilst watching the Europa League. But I do think it's a really interesting competition because Lazio have been good. Obviously, there are 3 unbeaten teams in the Europa League this season, Lazio and Athletic, 2 of them. The third is Anderlecht, who have been quietly very, very impressive. But I don't think that Anderlecht are going to win the Europa League, as much as that would be a brilliant story for European football. For someone outside of the top 5 leagues to go and win this trophy would be absolutely amazing. I struggle with seeing it right now. But this Lazio and Athletic leading the league means it's very easy to talk about them as the 2 favourites. But I think you would have been, outside of the English clubs, they were 2 of the sides you would have looked at the start of the season and said, yeah, okay, recruited well. There were questions, obviously, about Baroni at Lazio and whether he was going to be able to make this tick. But ultimately, it has come to pass. And we do see the way that Lazio have kind of gone about their business this season. Yes, they've fallen off a little bit in the race for things in Serie A, but generally, the way that they've performed this season and some of the results they've pulled out, some of the big results that they've pulled out have been nothing to sniff at whatsoever. And I think they're one of those teams, when you talk about teams that are like not in the title race, but you will have a say. Lazio really feel like a team like that in Italy right now. But their performances in the Europa League have been very, very calm, collected, well put together, which is not all that Lazio generally. But also there is this kind of thing hanging over them. We're talking about narratives. Sven-Goran Eriksson passing away during this season, a man who put together one of the best Lazio teams we've ever seen. And this is a well put together, well built squad that has a lot of talent in it. And we moved on from the Lazio that had been there for years and years and years in Immobile and Sergej Milinkovic-Savic. You kind of come away from those players. Even Luis Alberto was a massive part of what Lazio were doing. And you're seeing these players come through and make a difference. Zaccagni been given the captain's armband was a big one, despite he's kind of moved there and made that jump from Hellas Verona and been really impressive for most of them. Worked his way into the Italy squad as well. There's some really interesting footballers, I think, in this Lazio side. And the way that they've been playing this season means that they are a genuine threat to go and win this competition. Athletic are very, very good, very well put together. And we've seen them, across the course of this season, they don't lose many games. They give a fight to absolutely everyone. And Valverde has them as a very solid unit that they just don't give away all that much. And I think that there is a level with Europa League that these are 2 teams that will respect the competition. And obviously we're in a new format now with no drop downs. It's a lot easier to look at it and think, okay, who's going to cause damage? It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Eintracht, because if they do lose Marmoush, then how they respond to that setback, I think is a pretty big one. But then you come to Man United and Tottenham, who are currently 7th and 9th in this competition. So obviously, United have had a really weird start where they drew 3 games in a row, and now they've won 3 games in a row, and that's pushed them currently into the top 8. And what we've seen from them in recent weeks is this move towards, I think, an acceptance of Amorim's system, an understanding a little bit more of how they're doing it. And, bear in mind, when he took over, there wasn't all that much going on in terms of there wasn't that much time to have on the training ground because games were coming so thick and fast. And I think it was interesting that it's taken until this point, and when there was a little bit more of a take a breath, for things to have started to work in a more positive direction for United. Now, I don't think they're perfect. And I don't think they're going to be perfect this season. They might not even be perfect next season, but they are starting to move in the right direction, I think, from a perspective of what could United win this season? Well, we've seen them go and win cups before, right? We've seen them win cups against the odds. At the start of the season, you would have probably looked at this and thought, well, are they up there with the favourites in this competition? Yeah, I think they would have been. And same for Tottenham. But Tottenham are going to be an interesting one to kind of keep an eye on in terms of, one, what they do in the market, and two, how these players come back from injury and how that affects the squad going forward. So I do think it's going to be interesting. But if you were to push me right now, I would say that whilst it's obvious to pick the top two, there is a reason that both Lazio and Athletic are at the top of this table. And there is a reason why a lot of people are looking at them. And it's because they don't give away all that much stupid stuff, because they do things pretty consistently. They've been very consistent in these competitions. They've played some very, very impressive games. And we're kind of at that point now, I think, where you've started to learn a fair bit about the sides in the competition, the fact they'll play less games, the fact that they both have ambitions of finishing in the top sort of places in their league, in the Champions League spots, but also not so much so that they're pushing for a title, and that winning the Europa League would mean more to them than where they are in the table at this point. And I think that's a really crucial part of how you kind of understand this competition going forward.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Man United do seem a different beast now for me in this competition, though. Like with Amorim, I do think that this changes, and you're watching the way that this is already evolving for United. And I think that this competition now is way more important than it probably was when they set out. They're on the back of 3 straight wins in the Europa League, and obviously they've been through some difficult moments already in this competition. But you see what that FA Cup win over Arsenal did for United. Like, they're not going to do much in the Premier League. Like, they're 13th at the moment in the Premier League. They're 12 points off of Newcastle, who are 5th. Like, this is a huge climb to even get into those European positions, which they'll try to do. But they're the best thing that can come from Man United this season is cup glory. And for Amorim, the Europa League is just such a good way to kind of
they're too far back to qualify for the Champions League in the table. It doesn't really matter. If they won every game from here to the end of the season, maybe, but they're not going to do that. So there's no way that they claw that gap back, I don't think. This is their best and probably only, actually for both them and Tottenham, shot of being in the Champions League next season. Now, I think that matters less perhaps to Tottenham than actually going and winning the trophy. But I think from a United perspective, that would be massive.
It did, mate, because they were counting on being in the Champions League this season. And even when Amorim took over from Ten Hag, that was still the aim. Obviously, like, the results have meant that it's nigh on impossible for that to happen. But they miss out on so much by not being in the Champions League next season. Financially, yes, but also in terms of like convincing people of the path that they are on and getting in new signings to say the Champions League is here. And to win this tournament would just give them a level of clout that they haven't had for a while and that they need right now. I think a lot of potential new signings will be intrigued by Amorim and certainly will be willing to give him a chance. But if they had a proper trophy under their belts like this one, it changes a lot. And I think United will all buy into this. The only difficult thing really for Amorim in terms of winning the Europa League is going to be how he balances out his squad because it's so small. He has like 14 players that he trusts. And because you still got to take the Premier League seriously, you can't finish 13th in the Premier League. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
So he's got to find a way of getting optimum performances and results on both sides of it. And that, I think, is his biggest test of actually going on to win this competition. But I'd have him in there. I think you're right in terms of the way you position it. But in terms of how important it is to win this tournament, Man United is right up there now.
Yeah, 100%. Just quickly on the Conference League before we go, I think it would take something pretty miraculous to stop Chelsea winning the Conference League at this point, because I think there is a level that with the kind of double squad that they've got going on here, that those players are taking the Conference League seriously. If Chelsea had taken their eye off the ball in this competition, maybe, I think there's a chance that they get knocked out by Vitória Guimarães or a Fiorentina or even a Betis, who are all over the place at the moment. But you kind of look at it and you're trying to work out exactly what it is. And I think those players who are getting their kind of sole opportunities in the cups will continue to take this seriously, because they'll be like, no, we want to be part of this going forward. And that's an important thing. And that's the reason why I kind of see Chelsea running away with it. The problem with everyone else is that Vitória have just lost their manager to Sporting, Rui Borges. So the man who's guided them to a very, very impressive league stage so far has left the club. Fiorentina haven't won in 5 in Serie A, despite the fact that at one point they've felt like they were in the title race. They lost on Monday night to Monza, who were bottom of the table. So that probably tells you where Fiorentina are right now, although I wouldn't be surprised if they made a 3rd consecutive final and lost a 3rd consecutive final. And then Betis felt like the real shot at challenging Chelsea, and the club makes no sense whatsoever. Results are all over the place. The players are all over the place. There's styles all over the place. The fact that they are 15th in this competition after 6 match weeks and will have to go through the knockout stages is absolutely bizarre, these playoff rounds. They just haven't turned up to the races at all. And I wouldn't be surprised if Betis get knocked out in the knockout rounds at this point. That's kind of where we are. They should, I think, come up against Copenhagen, which is going to be a very interesting game. 2 sides that have Champions League ambitions running into each other. So I don't think the Betis right now are a credible threat. And they felt like the only team who were going to have the kind of consistency and maybe pulling power to even challenge Chelsea in this competition. And I think that race is probably run at this point. I really hope I'm wrong, obviously, but I can't see it right now. Betis' season has been way too inconsistent for me to look at them and think that they are going to go on and find a run to go and win this competition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that overall this policy of having 2 squads for Chelsea has worked out well. I don't think it's something that could work well year after year for people, because you're already seeing that there are members of Chelsea that don't just want to be in the B team.
It's not even that. It's that it doesn't work if it's in the Champions League, because the players who are playing week in, week out in the Premier League, like a Cole Palmer, are not going to be content. They might be content with not being part of the Conference League squad. They're not going to be content with being left out of Champions League teams. No,
so that'll be a new challenge. But you already see, a few players right now at Chelsea who are making the gossip columns and agitating basically for moves, and a lot of them are in this kind of B team. So this conference lineup might look slightly different in the second half of the season, depending on who actually does leave the club. But either way, Chelsea are going to be far and away the best equipped team to go and win that competition. And it will take a lot. I'm not going to say a miracle. I nearly did, but it'll take a lot for them not to win it.
Yeah, 100%. Just for what it's worth, it is absolutely rubbish that Chelsea are in the Conference League. Like, this is such a great competition for teams going and winning things. And it's a real shame. Like, people don't care. They're playing the B team. They're still better than everyone else. Like, it's just a bit dark in some ways. That that's how it's kind of got to. Yeah. So I hope it's somebody else next year from the Premier League, and someone that maybe hasn't had that shot at doing European football in the same way. So anyway, that's my 2 pennies worth. And with that, we're going to call this a day. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. We'll be back on Friday with The Truth, where, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about Ficha Kvaratskhelia and that move to PSG, which feels very in the offing right now. Got the full here we go treatment earlier today. So all very close by this point. So that's exciting. Make sure you're tuned in on Friday morning. From us, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.